All right. How you guys doing? Day 2 of Dreamforce. How you feeling? Today's the big day, right? Long night. It's gonna be a long night. So thank you all for coming here and to this. My name is Wayne Cho. I am a product manager on the Lightning customization team. Joined Salesforce about 3.5 years now. When I joined Salesforce, actually been part of the Lightning customization for all that time. And I've really seen Lightning customization and how we're making admins and the capabilities to help admins build out customized experiences. I've really seen that evolve throughout those 3 years. So for the next 40 minutes, we're going to continue that. And we're going to show you some best practices on how you can really begin to build some awesome components and page templates within Lightning App Builder. Joining me on stage are actually the brains of the team, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hey, my name is Adeep Varatharajan. I'm a software architect working on the Lightning platform. I've been in Salesforce for about 8 years now, 5 of which are spent on the Lightning platform. And in my current role, I'm responsible for the Lightning App Builder, Lightning Pages, Dynamic Forms, and some other aspects.
Hey everyone, I'm Inbasagar. I've been with the Lightning App Builder team for 2 years now. I've had the opportunity to work on most of the products that we are demoing today. I'm really excited to be here to share some tips and tricks and best practices with you.
All right, thank you guys. Next slide, you've probably seen this many times in the past 2 days, and you'll probably see it a couple more times throughout the week. Basically, please make any purchasing decisions based on feature functionality that's available in the market today, and not necessarily what you may hear in this presentation. So quick look at the agenda. We have jam-packed, so I'm just going to jump right into it. For those of you that have worked with Lightning or are working in Lightning, you know about components. So we have Lightning components. Salesforce provides a set of standard, what we call base components. And as admins and developers, you're able to, basically those base components are building blocks that allow you to be able to create more larger components that we call experience components. So as you're building out these experience components, one thing we want to remind you and we advise you is to think about both the admin experience and the end user experience, because these are the people that will actually be working with your experience component within Lightning. Admins will use the components, work with the components to customize the Lightning pages that your end users experience, and the end users will be actually working within the components as part of their day-to-day tasks to get the information that they need. Next, I want to talk about page templates. So page templates is basically, they basically define the overall structure of that Lightning page and how the components are laid out within that page. So how does this all come together? Quickly, what you're seeing here is an opportunity record page on both the desktop and the mobile app. And the page area right below the navigation bar is what we call the Lightning page. And the Lightning page is basically, it's a container for metadata. Now, Lightning page are based on templates. And each template has a specific regions. In this particular example, we have a header, subheader, body, and sidebar. It's 4 regions. Out of the box, Salesforce provides a set of standard templates for you to use to customize your pages. But more importantly, you can create your own custom pages as well to really create a template and the regions that would really impact your specific business requirements. And for each of these, within each of these regions, you can add 1 or more Lightning components. The components are basically, think about them as building blocks, Lego pieces for you to customize this page however you want. So as admins, you have control to really customize this page and be able to organize the components however you want. And this is all done through the Lightning App Builder. Lightning App Builder is the WYSIWYG tool that allows you to customize the Lightning page just by dragging and dropping components into each of those regions. So you may have heard in the past 2 days, one of the big announcements of Dreamforce is the new Salesforce, our new Salesforce mobile app. And to support that initiative, we've actually enhanced and updated the Lightning App Builder to allow admins to really be able to not only create custom desktop experiences, but to be able to create experiences for both desktop and mobile as well. So think about it. You can actually now be able to, within Lightning App Builder, build specific custom record pages for the desktop, mobile, or both form factors. In Lightning App Builder, you can also create device-specific components, which you'll see in a little bit. And last but not least, one of the coolest features within Lightning App Builder is the ability to dynamically hide and control the visibility of Lightning components. And now you're able to do that by specific devices. So show me components only on the desktop versus on the phone. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Adeep, who will give us a deep dive into experience components.
Thanks, Wayne. So in this next section, we're going to talk about how you can take any component that you've built out as a developer and make it available for use in design time tools, such as the app builder and so on. Before we get started, let's talk about the component bundle, right? These are probably familiar concepts if you're writing an Aura component. Some of the files that you have within the bundle are the component file, the controller, the helper, and so on. If you're building a Lightning Web component, the bundle looks a little different. It consists of an HTML file, a JavaScript file, and so on. Now, for this session, we're going to be focusing on 2 files from each of these bundles. For Aura components, we're going to be focusing on the design file and the SVG. I'll get to what they contain in a minute. Similarly, in the Lightning Web component bundle, we're going to be focusing on the meta XML file. That's where a lot of the design, a lot of what goes into the design file in Aura components go into the meta XML file in LWC. And again, like in the Aura file, the SVG file as well. The first is the design resource. This file contains design time metadata about the component. It lets you, as developers, configure the behavior of your component, how it's configurable by admins when it's made available for use in tools such as the App Builder, Community Builder, Flow Designer, and other builder tools within Salesforce. It also lets you expose different attributes, specify what form factors your component is available for, any restrictions you want to impose on it, and so on. And we'll go into detail into all of those in a minute. And the other file that I talked about was the SVG. And this is used as the icon for your component. Now, when you make your component available for use in the App Builder, Community Builder, or any of these other tools, it's going to show up in what we call the palette to be and made available to be dragged onto the page. Now, the icon lets you differentiate your components from the others that are available on the palette. It makes it easy to discover and so on. So it's one of the things that we highly recommend you do, provide an icon for your component. Now, making a component available for use in these tools. We wanted to make sure that we made it as easy as possible. Now, exposing it is pretty straightforward. If you're writing an Aura component, all you need to do is implement an interface. In the example in the code snippet you see, we've implemented the flexi page available for record page interface, which essentially makes the component available for use in record pages. Similarly, you'll see a list of other interfaces that we have exposed for you to use. This is not an extensive list. The public documentation contains a more complete list, so I recommend going and taking a look at that. Now, if you're building a Lightning Web component, because the notion of interfaces and such don't exist, the mechanism is a little different. Instead of implementing an interface, what you would do is specify the different targets that you want your component to be available for in the meta XML file. In this case, the component specifies that it's available for record pages by specifying the Lightning record page target. Again, similar to the interfaces in Aura, we have a large set of targets that we have exposed. Again, this is not an extensive list. The public documentation contains a more complete list. But that's how you would take a Lightning Web Component and make it available for use in these tools. Now let's switch over to a demo where we're going to take this Lightning Web Component that we built out and make it available for use in the app builder. Now, this component uses the Lightning Map base component under the hood. We've done a bunch of testing around, testing with it. Seems to work fine. We have exposed a few different attributes. This component takes in the record ID that needs to be used to, render a location on the map. Takes in the name of the object, takes in a zoom level, takes in the field that we need to fetch the data from. So we've been doing a bunch of testing. Seems to work fine. Let's go take a look at what it takes to expose it for use in the app builder. So let's quickly actually switch to the app builder for a minute. You'll notice that on the list of components on the left, we don't have this component showing up. We have the section called custom, which shows all the custom components. It's empty at this point because our component is not available for use at this point. To make it available for use, what we'd have to do, if you remember my previous slide, was to go to the meta XML file and add a target. So let's go and do that quickly. Right. With that snippet over there, what we have done is indicated that this component needs to be made available for use in Lightning record pages. Now, when you make a component available for use in the app builder, you also want to maybe give it a nice label so it shows up well in the palette. So let's go specify one for this component. In this case, it maps out addresses, so we'll call it the address mapper. And also, we want to provide it with an icon so users can differentiate it from other components on the page. Let's go and add a new file and name it addressmapper.svg. And we've sort of created an SVG for it beforehand. So let's go and paste that in. Hit save. Now, once we're done with this, let's push this out to our org, and we're using SFDX for this. If you don't already use SFDX, I highly, highly recommend it. It makes development a lot easier. All right, let's switch back to the app builder, refresh the set of components. And you'll notice now that this component does show up. And all it took was, an indication in an XML file to say, hey, I need this component to show up for and be made available for use in record pages. So now that it shows up over there, let's go drag it onto the page and see what it looks like. All right, so it shows up, seems to work okay, except it's busted out of its region, so it's clearly breaking the layout of the page in certain ways. It's not something that we want because we know that admins might choose to add this component to different regions. This component's just not going to look right. Let's go take a look at the code of this component and see if we can figure out what's going on. And yeah, like Inba's pointing out, it's the width that's hard-coded that's causing it to bust out of that region. Now, this is something we recommend against doing. Do not specify hard-coded widths for your component because it needs to work in different regions. We recommend setting a width of 100%. So we've made that change. Let's now go and push this into the Scratch org. And okay, now that that's done, let's go refresh the page. And you can see now it's taking up the width provided to it by its region. It's not busting out of it. If we chose to move this component to a different region on the page, it would render fine. Let's go ahead and try to do that. There, so it takes up the width. So you can see now this component works well. It's clear that it'll adapt to the different regions that an admin might choose to add it to. So that works fine, except we did add a few attributes to this component, a few properties to the component to make it configurable, but none of them show up on the right. It would be nice if we could get them to show up here as well so the admins could choose to configure them. How do we do that? It's back to the meta XML file. This is where you can provide additional design time metadata about your component. In this case, we're going to go and add a target config and specify what properties we want editable on the right panel. In this case, you can see The first property that we've made editable is the address field property. This essentially takes in the name of the field that you want to fetch data from. We've provided it with a label and a description, and I'll point out where these show up in the app builder shortly. And we've specified a type. We said it's a string. The next property that we've exposed or made available for use in the app builder is the zoom level. In this case, it's an integer, and we've also set a min and max because we don't want the zoom to be over 30 in this case. Let's go take a look. Let's actually save this, deploy it to our org, and then go take a look at what it looks like in the app builder. And there, now you can see that these properties show up in the right panel, and if the admin chooses to, can choose to fetch data from different fields in that entity. What Inba is pointing at right now is the label that we had set, so it's easily understandable for admins. And in certain cases, if the attribute or the property is somewhat complex, difficult to configure, you can provide a help text, which is the description that we provided, and we render it as a help tooltip on the right. Now, this works fine. Again, it would be nice if we could make it easier for the admin to choose the field. In this case, because it's just a string field or a text field, the admin needs to know the exact name of the address field that they want to use to fetch data from. If, for example, there is a typo or they don't know the right name, that's going to result in the component erroring out. We don't want that. Now, for this particular scenario, we recommend using dynamic pick lists because this is a constrained set of values that you want the admin to choose from. What you could do is create an Apex class that returns a set of valid values for this field. So in this case, we've gone and added an Apex class called the address fields data source, which implements the Visual Editor dynamic pick lists interface or abstract class. And this tells the system that it can be used as a pick list for these property editors within the app builder or any other tool. The function that Inba has highlighted is the getValues function. And this is pretty much the most important function or method in this class. It is used to return a set of valid values that you want displayed. In this case, because we wanted to show a list of all the valid address fields, we are essentially querying the schema of the entity that this page is bound to and getting all the address fields and returning that to the client. Now, once you have this Apex class created, it is pretty straightforward to go associate it with your entity. All you need to do is specify a data source property on it, like Inba has pasted over there. So in this case, I have the data source property that's pointing at the address fields data source, the Apex class that I created. Let's go and deploy this onto the org. And then when we go back and refresh the property editor, you can see it now looks a little different. It's not a plain text field. It's actually a pick list with all the valid values that are being returned by your Apex data source. So this is one way to make your components easy to configure. In this case, if we hadn't created that pick list, the admin would have essentially had to go to their schema builder or object manager to go figure out all the different fields and find one that's valid for use over here. So now this component seems to work fine on the page that we are previewing. The properties seem configurable. We also did test it out to make sure that it works fine on mobile devices. So let's go preview what that looks like in a Lightning page. Now, what you'll see here is this component in its place. There's a warning that says that this component only supports desktop and not phone. And this is because, by default, any component that you expose for use in record pages are only made available for use on desktop devices and not your phone. If you do want to make it available for use in phones, you actually need to go back to the meta.xml file and specify that, indicate that it's actually available for use in that device. The way you do that is by specifying a list of supported form factors for your component. In this case, we have gone and specified that this component is available for use on the small and large form factors, which is the phone and the desktop devices. Let's go and save that and deploy it back to the org. And now let's go to the app builder, see what that looks like. And you'll notice now that because you've indicated that this component is available for use on phones, we don't put the placeholder on it. We actually render this component out. If you actually save this page and deployed it or activate it for use on phones, this component would render. So with that, let's switch back to the slides. One aspect that we did not cover during the demo was adapting components to the width of the region. Now, the component that we had sort of made sure that using CSS adapted to the width of the region that was available to it, but it didn't choose to render less data. There are use cases where you might choose to say, hey, if my component is in a wide region, I need to render out the details of the records. But if it's in a narrow region, I don't want to render as much data. The way you do that is by first requesting the width of the region that your component is in, and using that to then make decisions about how much data that you want to render on the component. If you're writing an Aura component, the way you do it is you'd use this Lightning FlexiPage region info component to request the width, and we would then, as a framework, provide that width to you. And in the JavaScript, you can then use that value to then vary the behavior of your component. In LWC or Lightning Web Components, it's a little easier. All you need to do is specify a property of name FlexiPage region width and make it a public attribute. And we'll detect that when rendering the page and insert that value in. So it's a lot easier in LWC, as you can see. The valid values that we provide are small, medium, large, and extra large. Where these values come from, Inba is going to cover as a part of the custom template section. Now, you made the component available for use, or you've built out a component. There are some guidelines, some styling guidelines that we recommend you follow just to make sure that your component works well in all contexts. The first is the width of the component, and we saw this during the demo as well. We recommend that you not hard code widths of your component because doing so will cause it to not work well in all the different templates and all the different pages that it's made that the admin drags it onto. So we recommend specifying 100% width. The other thing to keep in mind is adding margins to the root element of your component is going to increase the effective width, thus breaking the first rule. So we recommend not doing that. We actually recommend avoiding that completely. You can add paddings to the root element because that does not increase the effective width. But it's probably something you don't want to do because it's going to result in a lot of white space around your component, because we as a framework take care of inserting spacing between your components. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing that can cause your component to not work right is if you use rules such as position absolutes, floats, etc., because what they do is remove the element within your component from the flow of the document, and this in turn can result in breaking the layout of your page. Again, something that you don't want, so we recommend not doing this. And lastly, wrapping components in the SLDS card class or using the Lightning card component, which is a base component. The reason we recommend this is there are certain other platform features such as org theming, custom app theming that let you control aspects of the app, such as a background at a global level. Now, if the admin chooses to configure those properties in the org, if you don't use a card to wrap your component could look broken depending on the color schemes, etc. If you do use a card, we'll make sure that your component renders fine, looks fine, regardless of what configurations the admin has. So again, something to keep in mind when you build out your components. Now, one question you might have is, should you be writing in Aura or LWC? LWC, if you've attended some of the other sessions, and we probably have a lot more coming up, is obviously the direction we're going in, and so it's what we recommend doing. There's a lot of different advantages like LWC is faster to render, we fetch data or we pre-fetch data for Lightning Web Components, et cetera. But there are a few other sessions you can attend to learn more about that. In the context of this session, the main difference is that if you're writing an Aura component, and that's what you see on the right, you can only provide a single design configuration for your component, which means, say your component is made available for use in record pages and home pages, you can't vary the properties that are exposed for use in each. However, if you write a Lightning Web component, you can actually specify multiple different design configurations. And that includes specifying a different set of properties, specifying a different set of supported form factors, and so on. And as you build complex components, at least we have noticed that this is a scenario that happens or comes up pretty often where you might choose to provide different set of properties. And so this makes it useful because then you don't need to expose two different components. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Inba to cover custom page templates.
Hello, everyone. Let's talk a little bit about building custom page templates. So this is a feature we're really excited to talk about because custom page templates lets you as admins and developers to control the layout of the page. Custom page templates lets you define the number of regions, the size of these regions, and even the characteristics and behavior of these regions, depending on what form factor these pages are being viewed in. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at how to build these custom templates. Custom templates are currently available only in Aura and are not available in LWC. And building one in Aura is as simple as implementing an interface. As you can see on the screen here, we have the three interfaces, Lightning Record Home Template, the Lightning App Home Template, and the Lightning Home Template. Depending on what type of page you want to expose your template for, you can implement any one of these interfaces, and you should be good to go. Now, let's take a look at a sample template to understand what the basics are that go into building a custom template. Right on the top of this code snippet, you can see that I've implemented the interface Lightning Record Home Template. Now, what this tells the system is that this template is going to be available only for record home pages. And then I'm going to define the attributes, header, and main. And these are going to be my actual regions. And hence, I'm going to declare them of type Aura component arrays. What this tells the system is that these regions are not going to deal with primitives such as strings or integers, but with actual component instances. Finally, I go ahead and add my regions to my markup. And since this is just going to be a simple template, I'm going to be nesting them in between divs. We'll take a look at a more complex use case when we move to the demo. Next, like with experience components, we need to provide some valid metadata for custom templates as well. So here you can see that I have my custom template tag called FlexiPage template, and nested within it are my FlexiPage regions. And you can see that I've given the names, header, and main, and these are going to match with the values that I gave in my .cmp file as well. And finally, I'm going to add the attribute default width, and I'm going to specify it with the value large. And this is the way we kind of pass in the value of the size of the regions to the FlexiPage region info component that Adeep talked about a few slides back. And again, the values are going to be small, medium, large, and extra large. So now that we have covered the basics of how to build a template, let's go ahead and take a look at a demo. Now, for the purpose of this demo, we've created this custom template. And right off the bat, you can see the three regions, header, main, and sidebar. And what's unique about this template is we've also added another region, a drawer on the right-hand side, whose visibility can be toggled on or off. Now, this kind of covers the scenario where admins want their users to have access to certain components, but they don't want them to be visible on the page all the time. So let's go ahead and take a look under the hood to see how this template is actually built out. So now you can see I have my 4 regions defined as attributes, the header, the main, sidebar, and drawer. And since these are my regions, I'm going to declare them of type Aura component arrays. And I've laid out these regions using the Lightning layout component. This is actually a base component that is available as part of the Lightning namespace. So let's go ahead and see how to expose my component as a template, a custom template, to the app builder. The first thing I need to do is make it implement the interface Lightning record home template because I want to expose my custom template only for record home pages. Next, let's go ahead and add an SVG for the template. Now, this SVG is kind of important because this shows up in the template picker, and it gives the admins a preview of how your template looks like and what's the behavior your template is going to show. And we highly recommend you choose an image that best describes this. Let's go ahead and save the file. And now we need to provide some valid metadata for this template. Let's head over to the design resource. And I'm going to add my label and my FlexiPage templates information. There are a couple of things that I want to point out here. So the label that I've specified here, the header, a right sidebar collapsible drawer, this is going to show up in the template picker along with the SVG, which we'll see during the demo. And I've also specified my 4 regions as attributes, and I'm going to specify the default widths for these regions as well. These sort of correlate with the sizes that we assume these regions are going to take up when these regions are going to render in design time. So let's go ahead and save this file and push this out to our org, and let's go to the app builder and take a look at how this template looks like. So let's create a record page because that's the kind of page we've exposed this custom template for. This is going to be for an account object. And here, what you see is the template picker. As you can see on the top, we have the standard templates that are available out of the box. We have about 16 of them right now. And if you scroll down, you can now see the custom template we have created for the purpose of this demo. You're able to see the label that we provided in the design resource, the header, right sidebar, and collapsible drawer. And once you click on the label, your SVG shows up on the right-hand side. So yeah, let's go ahead and finish creating the template. And there you go. You can see that the template is rendered, and you don't need to worry about the drag and drop features. We implement that as a part of the framework. And as Adeep is showing you, he's going to drag on some components onto the regions. Now, let's go ahead and try to open up the drawer and customize that region as well. But wait, you're not able to do that because App Builder click protects the entire canvas to make sure that admins are not making any changes or performing operations that they're not supposed to be doing within the setup context. So let's go ahead and see how we can enable that element. So you head over to your component, and you identify which element you want to disable click protection for. In our case, it's going to be the lightning button icon. And we are going to add the class design allow interaction to this. And now let's save and push this out to our org and see if we can customize the region. Refresh the canvas. And there you go. You're able to view the region now. Let's go ahead and drag a component onto there. And as you can see, it all works fine. So with that done, let's go ahead and move on to some of the best practices. First up, specify a label and SVG. As we covered during the demo, this kind of helps admins identify and differentiate your custom templates. So choose an SVG and a label that best describes what your template does. Next, interactable regions. As we mentioned before, there are valid use cases where you want certain parts of your canvas to be interactable, and you want to disable click protection for those. So if your use case calls for it, use the design allow interaction class on your elements. Next up, specify default widths for your regions. Many components, specifically the standard components, kind of use this value to figure out how much data they should be rendering based on the size of these regions. Specifying an invalid value or an incorrect value here would result in the components not behaving in the expected way. Also, we know if you want to build templates that are responsive, you might want to specify different default width values for these regions. There are overrides available for this, and please feel free to do so if your use case calls for it. Next, let's talk a little bit about styling your templates. Provide sufficient spacing. Adeep mentioned we kind of provide spacing in padding in between components. We are able to do that because we know the boundary for these components. However, we do not do that for templates because it kind of takes away some control from you as admins and developers. However, then it means you need to provide the padding and spacing for your regions. Avoid backgrounds. As we mentioned before, admins can sort of provide org theming and branding values. When you specify a background for your custom templates, it kind of overrides the value. So avoid setting backgrounds on your templates. My next 2 points are around this are going to be similar. Do not make your template components extensible, and your template components should not extend other components. This is because this kind of results in an unreliable behavior, and we highly recommend you don't do this. And finally, avoid adding a lot of logic into the template. It's important to understand what the role of the template is. The template is responsible for the layout of the page and should not be responsible for performing operations like saving and fetching data. If there is a need for adding logic there, try to keep it to a minimum and leave the implementation of actual logic to the components that are actually being dragged and dropped onto the page. Next, we have 2 points which we felt are kind of important and we wanted to draw attention to, so we have broken them down into 2 separate slides. So here, the first one is going to be avoid accessing the contents of the regions in JavaScript. As you can see in the code snippet here, I'm trying to access the contents of region 1 here. This is something you should definitely avoid doing because it does not work in Lightning Experience. It does work in App Builder sometimes, but we are working on trying to remove support for this, and it will not work in the future. Next, do not reference a region multiple times in the markup. Again, like in the code snippet, I have the region header, and I'm trying to reference it twice. What happens here is the same set of components are being rendered multiple times, and this kind of results in unexpected behaviors and causes errors while rendering the page. So again, something you should avoid doing. With this, I'll be handing it back to Wayne. Thank you.
Thank you, Adib. Thank you, Inba, for sharing with us the knowledge and expertise on how you can really build awesome experience components as well as page templates. So quickly, for you, if you want to learn more, here are a couple of trailheads that you can take on your flight back. And also, come visit us, Lightning App Builder booth in the Trailhead Zone. You'll be able to hear us about some of the cool features that we're working on with Lightning App Builder in the upcoming releases. So we have a couple minutes here. If there are any questions, we'll be happy to take them. Yes, we do. So out of the box, we do, as you saw within Lightning App Builder, we do have a set of 16 templates and as well as a handful of components.
So like public code?
Oh, public.
So, sorry. These components aren't available for use programmatically. So if you, a lot of the experience components, a lot of the components that you'll see showing up in the App Builder can only be used declaratively within this tool. We actually don't have a good catalog of all the different components that can show up in all the different scenarios that they might show up in, because we've got certain components that say only show up for record pages and only show up for if you're editing an account page and so on. That is something we're talking about and looking to build, but it doesn't exist today. There isn't an extensive list.
I more meant source code for inspiration. So like
source
if I
code.
wanted to go build the drawer, for example, is that code available?
That is currently available for the drawer.
So there is a blog post that we published with a template that has similar behavior. So I can, if you can come find me after this, I can give you a link to that. So we're working in Lightning Experience?
very much, everyone. If Wayne, Adeep, and Inba would be happy to take more questions outside of the room.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you for taking the time.